Hey guys, my name is Kyle Gagnon, and this is my project on a quantitative approach to the hazards of coal mining. Here's our learning objectives. To recognize trends in fatal and non-fatal injuries in the coal mining industry from 2003 to 2013. To interpret FIR and TRC rates for coal mining, FIR being the fatal incident rate and the TRC being the total recordable cases for coal mining. To address common hazards in the coal mining industry, and to preview preventative methods against such hazards and to make recommendations as we move into the future. Alright, so for our introduction, I think it's pretty important to talk about what coal is before we actually talk about how it's mined. So coal is a fossil fuel comprised of compressed carbon that stems from organic matter, particularly dead plants. This is a process that occurs over a long period of time and results in a black kind of brownish sediment rock that is easily recognizable. I'm sure you've all probably seen it before. Since this process takes a long time, the sediment is found deep within the Earth's crust in spots called coal beds or seams. And due to the location of most of these coal seams, underground mining is a common method that's used to extract the sediment. Surface mining for shallower seams can be used, but a much more frequent method is underground mining. And with such a large portion of the coal mining industry choosing underground mining, it quickly climbed the ladder for the most dangerous occupation throughout the 1800s. And during the beginning years of the coal mining industry, employees were in basically a constant state of danger whenever they embarked below the ground for coal. Proper techniques to extract the coal efficiently yet safe weren't really thought of at the time, and mine shafts were extremely fragile at best. A lot of the trusses used to support the shafts were made out of decomposing wood, and proper ventilation systems and proper personal protective equipment weren't really thought of at the time, or they were probably thought of, but they weren't really established as a necessity to coal miners. So the environment was an extremely harsh and extremely demanding environment to live in. A lot of close spaces, a lot of injuries resulting from contact with objects and equipment, especially if a coal miner is swinging a pickaxe in a confined area. There's a good chance that he may hit someone or something that he's not supposed to. So those are a couple big hazards in the coal mine. Couple noticeable major disasters that I feel I need to hit on were the Monongahela mine disaster, the Cherry mine disaster, and the Farmington mine disaster. According to the Mine Safety and Health Administration, or MSHA, each incident resulted in a combined death total of 700 workers that were killed by those three instances alone. And progressing through the 1900s, more and more disasters were observed as the need and demand for coal reached an all-time high. Actually, it wasn't until the Farmington mine disaster that we started to see a little bit of improvement in the mining industry. And by improvement, I mean the first establishment of a structured safety program. In November 1968 was when the Farmington coal mine disaster occurred in West Virginia and left 78 workers trapped inside the coal mine and consequently leading to their death due to an unexpected explosion during a cave-in. The incident was a stepping stone to sort of establishing the first federal Coal Mine Health and Safety Act in 1969. And what this brought was a more structured and more effective approach to safety in the mining industry, along with a greater emphasis on precautionary measures before entering the coal mines and when leaving, as well as the safety-first mentality that was being instilled throughout the industry. It also brought along regulatory compliance and quarterly inspections of the coal mine, as well as monetary fines that could then be paid as a result from continual violations. This act would actually later transcend into the Mine Safety and Health Administration, as I said, MSHA, whose role in the mining industry mimicked that of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration for other industries. So there is sort of a silver lining to a couple of these major disasters, and I guess one way you can look at it is that they were in the early stages. It could only have gotten better from there. So hitting on a couple other hazards that they would find within the coal mines. Coal dust being a big one. I'm sure you guys have heard of black lung disease. That is something that originated from coal mining. It's when workers were breathing in um, this particle called coal dust from when they were doing their mining and excavation processes. It would circulate throughout their lungs, and it could lead to a bunch of adverse health effects. Another big Another big hazard that they were faced is along the same lines of coal dust is carbon monoxide. Since coal is compressed CO2 basically, if coal is ignited or if it has if it's burned, it gives off deadly carbon monoxide. And one thing I thought I should share with you guys is I don't know if you ever heard the expression of being a canary in a coal mine, but basically what they would do, since no one had personal monitors on them to monitor for carbon monoxide or for methane gas that would circulate below the surface of the Earth's crust, they would use canaries. And basically, as gruesome as it sounds, if anything was present in the coal mine, whether it be high levels of coal dust circulating in the air, carbon monoxide, or methane, they would instantly see adverse health effects in the canaries, whether this be obviously death, sickness, or illness within the canaries. They could kind of measure that, and it would sort of be Mother Nature's way of offering poisonous gas detection. But it would also give miners a feeling of reassurance, knowing that when they went underground, um, they knew that they weren't going to run into poisonous gases due to these canaries. And this sort of kicked off the movement for um, personal devices and safety in the coal mining industry. So for my hypothesis, why did I choose this topic? I chose this topic because for previous presentations I've done the oil and gas industry, hydraulic fracturing, and I kind of want to do something different. So I went on the BLS website and I looked up common occupation data, and coal mining came up. And I was like, hey, well, I haven't done that yet. I don't know much about it, so why not? And based on the history I've already told you guys and the knowledge that I've already pulled, I came up with this hypothesis. It says, due to an increase in knowledge of safety practices and technological advances, fatal and non-fatal injuries for the coal mining industry will have declined over the 11-year period. 11-year period being from 2003 to 2013. So why this prediction? Basically, what I said previously, back in the early stages, they didn't really know a lot about the safety and health industry. There wasn't an established organization to help prevent injuries and to promote health and safety in the coal mining industry. But a lot has changed since then. I think with advanced technologies, we can start to see improved safeguards against occupational hazards. And moving forward, I think we're going to continue to see a decline in injuries and fatalities due to better technological advances and more knowledge of safety. So for my methodology and procedures, the data primarily used for my study was from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS, from the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The mean and standard deviation for total fatalities per year were calculated based on the data received from MSHA. Mine Safety and Health Administration was really critical for this, obviously, because it's dealing with coal mining. And based on the number of employee hours worked in the coal mining industry and the amount of fatalities observed per year, I could properly record a fatality incidence rate and a total recordable cases rate. Also, forecasting, I was able to use the information we obtained from this past week from Professor Oloyan, as well as the least squared method for linear regression, and properly forecast some future events or for some future years for fatalities and non-fatal industries in the coal mining industry. So to start my results portion of this project, I wanted to show you guys first the fatal injuries by state for 2004 through 2014. And one thing that I really wanted to pull from this is just where most of the coal mining is being done and where most of the fatalities are coming from. Obviously, you can see West Virginia with the 121 fatalities and Kentucky with the 69 for a total of 190 fatalities between the two of them. That's a big portion. 65% of that data is in those two states alone. So obviously these are two huge hotbeds for the coal mining industry, and obviously the more, if you kind of look at the data, the more fatal injuries one state has, generally it's the more coal mines they have as well. So that's directly correlated between the two of them for fatal injuries by state and the amount of coal mines per state as well. Next, moving into the fatalities and injuries. This graph shows you, I constructed, shows you the amount of fatal injuries by year, as well as the NFDL and NDL. NFDL being the non-fatal injuries resulting in days lost, and the NDL is the non-fatal injuries which do not result in days away from work. And adding up the fatal injuries, the NFDL and the NDL will yield your total injuries, which I could then pull my FIR and TRC rates from. Also using the amount of employee hours worked by all employees in the industry. Also based on this data, I was able to compute appropriate mean and standard deviation for all categories: fatal injuries, NFDL, NDL, and total injuries. And as you can see, one thing you should be able to notice from this is that total injuries spanning from 2003 to 2013 is spanning from 4,568 injuries to 3,124 injuries. So right away you're able to see that the total number of fatal injuries, or total number of injuries overall for the coal mining industry has increased as time goes on, which is a positive correlation to our hypothesis. To back up what I said in the previous slide, this is a graph that I put together that shows the total number of injuries in comparison to the non-fatal days lost injuries, the no days lost injuries, and the fatal injuries. The number of injuries axis is on the left, while the number of fatal injuries is on the right. And one thing I wanted to show in this is that the overall trend in data is decreasing for each category, for both total injuries, NFDL, NDL, and fatal injuries. So we can see an overall decrease in injuries from 2003 to 2013, which again supports our hypothesis. Again, hitting on fatalities and injuries, this is a graph that depicts the total number of fatal injuries, the NFDL, the NDL, and total injuries to go along with our graph shown on the previous page. So this table is something I put together to show the number of employees per year, the number of hours worked in millions per year, fatal injuries, and then from this data I was able to record my FIR and TRC rates. I also calculated the mean for each category. But one thing I really wanted to stress on this slide is the values for the FIR and TRC rate. As you can see, the FIR directly reflects the number of fatal injuries per year, meaning that if one increases as well. If one decreases as well. Whereas for a TRC rate, it remains rather consistent as a constant trend spanning from 2003 to 2013, decreasing from 5.82 to 3.44, which again indicates that we have a decrease in overall injuries for the coal mining industry. Now we're moving into the forecasting part of my results. This is a table I constructed to depict the least square regression line data accumulated based on the fatal injuries per year from 2003 to 2013. As you can see, our slope is a negative 0.927, and our y-intercept is a 34.56. And directly above that, is the sum of each total category that I computed. Just the one thing I wanted to hit on with this is our y-equals equation is negative 0.927x plus 34.56. With the negative 0.927 being our slope, you can instantly see without plotting any data that we are going to have a decrease in our total fatal injuries going from 2003 to 2013. And this is the graph to go along with our supporting evidence from the last slide. As you can see, the scatter plot is the total number of fatal injuries, while our line that cuts through it is the least squared regressions line. One thing I would like to point out is that although fatal injuries has climbed and receded for both the 2006 and 2010 mark, where the 2006 was at 47 fatalities and 48 at 2010 there was 48 fatalities, the overall slope of the data seems to be decreasing still. And what this means is that as the years go on, less and less fatalities are being observed heading into the future, even though single circumstances such as a cave-in or explosion can drastically influence the overall progression of the data. Both of these instances I actually looked up, and one for the instance for 2006, it occurred with the Sago mine disaster, and in 2010 with the Upper Big Branch mine disaster, both of which were just happened to be located in West Virginia, which actually isn't that surprising based on the data that we found on the first slide. This claim is supported even further when referring to the FIR and TRC rate, which we already went over for 2003 to 2013. And just another thing I wanted to point out is that in order to obtain even more hard evidence for the statement that this is a constantly decreasing trend, is to actually go ahead and do a couple calculations for the 2014 through 2016 year. By taking the equation y equals negative 0.927 and multiplying it by 12, which would be the term in which 2014 falls in, 11 being 2013, so 12 would be 2014, plus 34.56, we yield a value of 23.44. Although this value is larger than the number of fatalities observed in 2013, the overall trend of the graph will still continue to decline in fatalities due to the negative slope. So, for example, if you look at the year 2015, the equation will now be y equals 0.927 times 13 plus 34.56, which yields a value of 22.51, and so on and so forth, even for 2016, where it will be y equals negative 0.927 times 14 plus 34.56 to yield a value of 21.58. This will be a continual regression for decreasing injuries moving into the future based on my forecasting. So, some recommendations moving into the future. Today's coal mining are outfitted with precautionary measures to combat even the most hazardous situations. And I think this is a common trend that has to be addressed even moving forward as more precautionary measures are becoming available to coal miners. Engineering controls can be used to reduce hazards before the operations even begin or before a single injury even occurs. Examples of such engineering controls include the safety guard and stops for heavy machinery, as well as vehicles, and strategies to limit conveyor noise and other noise pollution, and proper ventilation systems to filter out coal dust and expel the toxic fumes from the operation site. These engineering controls act as preventative measures that, when combined with administrative controls, provide a much safer work environment that enhances overall work quality and reduces risk. Administrative controls can be crucial when planning during the planning and design process of a coal mining operation. Some of the more effective administrative controls include a proper hiring process, employee screening, adequate training for coal mining employees, fitting job and shift rotations for employees to limit exposure that the employees may experience, and also to preserve employee relations. And one of the perhaps the most critical element or most critical administrative control is housekeeping, making sure that the workplace is kept clean and no dust is accumulating in one spot. One other major administrative responsibility is effective communication. This includes communicating how many employees are below the ground and the employee's exact location and the time in which the employee descended and returned to the surface. If proper communications are established prior to the mining operations, employees could be left inside the mine or trapped if any incident were to occur. And this also includes any injury that is sustained while performing regular operations. Employees have to have a way to reach out to supervisors or other employees on the surface if anything goes wrong. And that is why I recommend that every employee has some sort of radio or other established contact with the surface before descending into the coal mine. Um, Even if it required some sort of GPS signaling device to notify superiors where employees are at the time, um, no form of communication is too much in any circumstance. And obviously, the last line of defense for employees is to be equipped with personal protective equipment. Um, this could uh, protect them from immediate threats, such as any falling objects. Uh, could be respiratory protection, could be eye protection, hard hats, boots, full 9 yards when it comes to coal mining. Nothing is too much. Um, and this means that the personal protective equipment that the employees carry must not only be able to detect them from immediate threats while performing day-to-day operation, but to also respond if any life-threatening situation were to occur. One recommendation I have to improve performance of the employee's personal protective equipment is obviously regular maintenance and cleaning of the equipment um, to ensure longevity and protection. For example, respirators should be checked before descending into the mine, as well as personal carbon monoxide detectors for any issues. Once inside the mines, it's extremely hard for any emergency response teams to reach employees who are in distress. So it's ever more critical to be prepared and to double check every piece of protective gear before the worker embarks on his coal mining operation. So in conclusion, obviously one of the biggest assets in the coal mining industry today to keep workers safe is knowledge and technology. Uh, Technology is advancing. A greater knowledge of safety procedures and safety measures are being explored. So as knowledge and as technologies increase, we're seeing an overall decrease in fatal injuries as supported by my data. I think this also has to be taken into account that learning from past mistakes is also yielding a decrease in fatal injuries as well as total injuries for the coal mining industry. Um, and based on this data, like I said, as we're moving into the 21st century and as more technology is becoming available to us and as our knowledge is expanding, injuries will continue to decline as a result. And these are my references. Thanks for listening, guys.